The First World War, the so-called war to end all wars. Brutality on a scale never before witnessed. In a world on the edge of an abyss, the Habsburg Empire is facing its own imminent demise. The young Emperor Charles I has only just ascended to the throne, but must now save both his empire and his dynasty at any price.
His primary goal is to end this war.
For Emperor Charles, peace must come by way of France.
It is a game of high stakes. Peace negotiations with the enemy, behind the backs of the German allies.
From their point of view, this was total betrayal.
Do you wish to declare war on Austria-Hungary, Your Majesty?
The final journey of an emperor. Charles I of Austria's Habsburg Dynasty and his wife Zita board the ship that is to take them into exile. The First World War has cost the Habsburgs their crown and their empire. Now, Austria's last emperor is leaving the historical stage forever.
Mr. Habsburg, Mrs. Habsburg, I'm Captain Arthur Snack. Welcome on board HMS Glover.
Thank you, Captain.
I must ask for your word that there will be no attempt to flee as long as you are in my custody.
Certainly, sir. I have received instructions. I hereby give the captain my word that during my journey, while I find myself under his supervision, I will certainly not make any attempt whatsoever to regain my freedom. With this promise, I consider myself bound in honor to him personally.
Signed, the Emperor of Austria, King of Hungary.
Certainly. A ruler can never abdicate. He can be ousted or executed. Good. That is, violence. But abdicate? No. No, no.
So be it. Your Majesties,
Where are you taking us?
there's been no order as yet. Please.
The journey of HMS Glowworm will take the former imperial couple down the Danube, through the countries that once belonged to the Habsburg Empire. Emperor Charles had hoped to save Austria-Hungary and end a war he did not start. In order to achieve his aims, Charles entered into a dangerous conspiracy, which began at the height of the bloodshed during the First World War. Autumn 1916. For more than 2 years, the armies of the Central Powers, Austria-Hungary and Germany, have been fighting the Triple Entente of France, Great Britain, and Russia on several fronts. Millions of soldiers have fallen, and millions more face the same fate. The conflict is taking its toll across Europe. For the Habsburg Empire, it is no longer merely a matter of military survival, but of the survival of the empire's population. In Vienna, a new emperor has recently ascended to the throne. The tens of thousands of people who line up at the soup kitchens every day place all their hopes in the young monarch. Every day of famine places more pressure on Charles I.
Don't send the War Minister to the front, Your Majesty. That remains the least of our problems for now. Send him to the outskirts of Vienna, to Ottakring, to Favoriten, where the almost unrecognizable forms of starving women clutching emaciated children are queuing up in front of the stores.
Hunger is our greatest enemy. It worsens the social divisions.
Then show the masses that you are with them.
Emperor Charles and Zita have inherited an empire that is in danger of being consumed by war and hunger.
It was clear that we would not survive another winter. It was therefore necessary to secure peace at any price. That was paramount, the most important thing.
It was widely accepted that, if the war was not swiftly brought to an end, defeat would be just one consequence. The entire political system would go up in flames. In fact, the end of the monarchy was already foreseeable at this stage.
The differences between the two central powers could not have been greater. Germany's military commanders, Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff, were committed to the idea that peace would only be achieved through victory. Their distrust of their brothers in arms grew rapidly.
There was a lot of prejudice against the Austrians. From a Prussian point of view, they were considered somewhat negligent. They weren't efficient enough. They weren't well trained. They weren't sufficiently motivated. Increasingly, the Germans felt that they were fighting for people who didn't deserve it.
In truth, without Germany's assistance, Austria's troops would no longer be able to fight effectively. As a result, Emperor Wilhelm's generals increasingly take control of the military campaign.
If we don't get the Austrians under control, we will face the risk that they drag the entire German Empire down with them.
What would you suggest, gentlemen?
Lieutenant Colonel Stolzenberg has produced a report I asked for. It suggests the best thing we can do is to get the heir to the throne on our side.
Charles, I disagree. Everybody knows he is no friend of Germany.
Then we make the Emperor our friend. Let us embrace him while we can still shape him.
However, Emperor Charles is unwilling to be embraced. Instead, he does his best to extricate himself from Germany's clutches. This is also a result of his family situation. His wife, Zita, is of the House of Bourbon, part of a Franco-Austrian connection dating back to the days of Maria Theresa.
The heir to the throne's attitude to the Germans can be summed up very simply. He didn't like them much. He respected them, but he didn't like them. And the moment he sensed their growing power, he liked them even less.
I fear I'm out of practice.
At the front, did you not shoot there?
Of course not.
Well, your soldiers did, and my countrymen no less.
I did not want this war. I never wanted this war.
You could have ended it. You were the Emperor.
I tried everything. Believe me.
He had set himself 3 goals. The first was to avoid a revolution and maintain the dynastic system. The second was to preserve some sense of unity among the many different nations of the empire. Thirdly, he hoped to make peace after 2.5 years of the insanity of war and go down in history as the emperor who brought peace.
In January 1917, the imperial offices in Baden near Vienna become the center of Habsburg power. Charles sets about achieving his goals. Charles assumes command of his troops and moves his military headquarters to Baden. Now, he hopes to take his armies out of the war as fast as possible. He is aware that he will receive no support from the Germans, so he decides to act on his own. Initially, the emperor enjoys the full backing of his new foreign minister, Count Ottokar Czenin.
Count Czenin.
Your Majesty.
But the most important support is provided by his wife, Zita of Bourbon-Parma.
2 aspects defined Zita in particular. She was the more intelligent, ambitious, and politically active of the 2. And she was also the person who clearly and confidently led the way. which many people disliked. Zita was never merely the beautiful empress responsible for representing the imperial family in public. Charles always considered her an equal.
See here, the new memorandum from Chenin.
Considerations for ending the war?
I find it extremely insightful.
What does he write?
That continued fighting will be our downfall. That is a mathematical certainty. We should accept the wounds we have received, abandon territorial ambitions, and make peace. That is what I've been saying. The Entente cannot be defeated.
I have asked my mother to talk to my brothers to make contact. Then we will know what the two of them can do for us.
Sixtus and Xavier.
Family ties will hopefully provide a path to peace. Charles has been close friends with Zita's brothers since they were children. Now, they are also related by marriage. Charles's wedding to Zita of Bourbon-Parma in October 1911 may have been an arranged one, but it is founded on love and brings the Habsburg and Bourbon dynasties even closer together. 6 years after the wedding, at Zita's suggestion, Charles's brothers-in-law Sixtus and Xavier are tasked with extending a peace offer to France. However, the war has divided the families. Both Sixtus and Xavier serve in the Belgian army. Nonetheless, blood remains stronger than nationality. The Bourbon princes are members of France's former royal family, and Charles considers them to be the perfect go-betweens, even if they no longer have any official influence in the French Republic.
Mais leurs sentiments sont pro-français.
The two of them continued to maintain pronounced pro-French and anti-German political positions. In addition, Sixtus and Xavier had a number of contacts at higher levels of government, including direct access to the President of France, Poincaré.
Auprès du président de la République, Poincaré.
The family connections in all directions were a source of great strength, despite the war and all the other difficulties.
What follows will go down in history as the Sixtus Affair. Charles I's secret peace negotiations with France, behind Germany's back. For more than a century, what really happened behind closed doors remained shrouded in mystery. Now, new evidence has come to light which can finally clarify the historical events that might have saved the Habsburg Empire and brought the First World War to an earlier end. In February 2017, the diaries of one of Emperor Charles's closest friends and confidants were discovered in Vienna. Tomáš Erdődy recorded the events of those significant days in minute detail, while also playing an important role. But are these diaries genuine? Historian Manfred Rauchensteiner and the Austrian State Archives are determined to find out.
A certain level of mistrust is always appropriate when one is dealing with historical records, particularly journals or diaries. So much is sugar-coated.
Erdődy's memoirs are compared with official documents from the archives to provide authentication. Does the handwriting match? Erdődy used a modern style of writing in 1917, which makes the comparison easier. The evaluation of the handwriting reveals that Tomáš Erdődy's journals are, in all likelihood, the real thing.
Tamas Erdődy's records are so interesting because they are authentic and were written as the event took place. It allows us to establish a chronology we didn't have before. He did not write this with the public or future historians in mind, but rather for himself. And one has the sense that he was fully aware of the intrigue that surrounded him and that he was a part of.
The dramatic events of the Sixtus Affair unfold over the following 3 months. From the outset, the Austrian Emperor places responsibility for the greatest diplomatic challenge of his reign in the hands of his friend, Tomáš Erdődy.
8th of February 1917. Today, His Majesty unexpectedly required my presence.
Tomáš, wonderful. Tell me, how are we doing with food supplies?
Well, you know, Your Majesty, we need some time.
Time is precisely what we don't have. Please, Tomáš, are you able to travel to Switzerland this evening?
With pleasure.
It is a very delicate and very dangerous matter.
Whatever Your Majesty desires.
Good. You will take the 7:30 express to Zurich.
As the Emperor's special emissary, Tomáš Erdődy will play a central role in the secret negotiations with France.
Yes.
Zita.
Your Majesty.
Tomáš, greetings.
Charles and Zita are unwilling to entrust the delicate issue to their regular diplomats.
You will go to Rue du Pommier, number 7, in Neuchâtel.
Erdődy's first mission takes him to Switzerland.
An old man, Monsieur Bay de la Tour, will open the door. He knows that you are coming. There you will meet Sixtus and Xavier. Give my brothers these letters.
Will there be negotiations with the French?
Listen, Tomáš. Your only order is to hand over these letters. You will explain that you are not at liberty to receive any information at all. Answer no questions that Sixtus or Xavier may ask you. Do not discuss the situation of the monarchy, the lack of food, the atmosphere in the country, anything. Do you understand?
Do the Germans know of this?
I don't plan to abandon them, but I hope to force them to make concessions. It is a risky step. Watch out for spies. So, my friend, Godspeed.
Should you be captured, neither His Majesty nor the Foreign Ministry will have any knowledge of you. And now, go with God, Tomáš.
The stakes are high. Holding secret negotiations with the enemy behind the back of the German allies could prove disastrous.
That is the incredible thing. These weren't the actions of the Austrian government. It was a private initiative of the Emperor and his wife.
This
was the result of a sense of dynastic superiority. They simply assumed that the word of an emperor carried more weight than that of a president or any other politician.
Als wenn es ein Ministerpräsident oder ein anderer führender Politiker hätte unternommen.
But how would France react to the signals from the enemy camp? Sixtus had held initial discussions with the French President Poincaré in advance to determine whether peace efforts at a family level should go ahead. In fact, France is facing many of the same difficulties as Austria. The population is tired of war, mutinies are breaking out, and many fear that the impending revolution in Russia could strengthen Germany. The peace initiative from Vienna provides a glimmer of hope.
Ce que l'on attend en France de l'Empereur Charles.
French expectations of Emperor Charles were very clear. They wanted to make a separate peace. To put it another way, the aim of the French was to drive a wedge between Germany and Austria-Hungary.
Séparer l'Autriche-Hongrie de l'Allemagne.
Neuchâtel, Switzerland. Throughout the First World War, the neutral country is a playground for spies. and a hub for the transfer of secret information among the warring powers. Sixtus and Xavier arranged to meet the emissary carrying the Austrian emperor's message of peace in a house near the lake.
"1335. It is time."
Tomáš Erdődy is traveling in the guise of an Austrian merchant. In his recently discovered journals, Erdődy describes events in Neuchâtel in detail.
In the name of His Majesty the Emperor, I thank you for coming. I have a letter from the Emperor for you. I found myself in a beautifully furnished room. Here you are. We confirmed each other's identities, and I then handed over the papers. The Emperor hopes that this will be followed by a personal meeting.
I cannot leave here with empty hands. I need a concrete offer.
The message is clear. There will be no peace with the Entente without sacrifices.
Serbia must have sea access. Belgium to be restored with the Congo, and the return of Alsace-Lorraine to France.
The princes now told me the wishes of the Entente, which are largely impossible to fulfill. I made a note of everything, and then Prince Sixtus confirmed the demands with his signature. Thank you. Farewell.
This is a very interesting, important section. The demands the Entente conveyed to Count Erdődy were undoubtedly extremely ambitious, and there was little chance of all of them being met.
The issue of Alsace-Lorraine is by far the most significant. Château du Haut-Königsbourg is now a French national monument, but at the time the castle was the personal property of the German Emperor Wilhelm II. It was therefore symbolic of the struggle between France and Germany for control of the territory, a struggle which had lasted more than 1,000 years. Germany had annexed Alsace-Lorraine during the Franco-Prussian War in 1871, a national humiliation for the French. Now, the Great War has transformed the region between Verdun, Metz and Nancy into a wasteland. France's President Poincaré is himself a native of Lorraine and hopes for the return of his homeland to France. Emperor Charles informs Poincaré almost immediately that a return of Alsace-Lorraine may be negotiable.
This is a promising start.
The stage is set for further negotiations.
Il y a aussi dans l'esprit de Poincaré.
In his memoirs, Poincaré wrote that he considered Austria responsible for the outbreak of the First World War. Perhaps he believed, following a certain logic, that Austria would also bring the war to an end.
À ce que l'Autriche soit celle qui vienne aussi y mettre fin.
The cloak and dagger efforts continue. The princes Sixtus and Xavier are sent to Austria to enter into negotiations, and Tomáš Erdődy is tasked with removing all traces of their presence, even going so far as to buy the photo plates used to produce their travel papers. Traveling under assumed names, the princes take a train from Switzerland to Liechtenstein and then on to Austria to meet the emperor. After 36 hours, the Bourbon princes reach Luxembourg Castle, Charles and Zita's residence south of Vienna. Entering in secret via a narrow spiral staircase, the two princes are accompanied by Tomáš Erdődy, who will subsequently record many salient details of the meeting that takes place in the imperial couple's private rooms.
Your Majesties, the subsequent reunion was extremely touching. Her Majesty had not seen her brothers for almost 3 years and embraced them both with tears in her eyes.
Charles!
My dear Sixtus, Servus.
It's a pleasure.
Xavier.
Charles!
Gentlemen.
Tomáš Erdődy guards the door. Nothing of what is to be discussed may leave the room. Negotiations continue through the night of the 23rd of March 1917 in Luxembourg, as the parties work to formalize an offer which will allow Austria-Hungary to make peace with France, if not the other Entente powers.
They were positive about your intentions.
Foreign Minister Czernin, however, is concerned.
Your Majesty, do not forget that you have responsibilities as a German ally.
I have not forgotten, Count Czernin. But one thing at a time. First, we must reach agreement with France. Then we will have to convince the Germans. If we fail, we're on our own. We have to make
the experienced politician knows where the greatest problem lies. If Charles promises France the return of Alsace-Lorraine, this would be tantamount to betrayal of an ally.
I am aware of this fact. I will take it under consideration. Gentlemen?
From Charles's point of view, his offer to France to convince Germany to make concessions concerning Alsace-Lorraine was easy to make. After all, it wasn't his country. On the other hand, it would be unfair to say that Germany was completely opposed. Some Germans believed it was important to make concessions in the case of Alsace-Lorraine.
The burden of the Habsburg Dynasty must have weighed heavily on Charles's shoulders during those tense weeks in early 1917. 12 emperors and 19 empresses, including Maria Theresa, lie buried in Vienna's imperial crypt. The future of this dynasty, with its long and glorious past, now hangs on the success of Charles I's peace initiative. The rise of the Habsburg dynasty, which originated in Switzerland, began along the Danube in Austria at the end of the 13th century. Originally, the Habsburgs were mere counts, but they rose to become emperors of the Holy Roman Empire. On the 17th of August, 1887, the young Archduke Charles is born at Persenbeug Castle in Lower Austria. Few people take note. The new arrival is eclipsed by the shining lights of the Habsburg universe, Emperor Franz Joseph and his wife Elizabeth, the legendary Empress Sisi. Nobody could have predicted that Charles would eventually succeed the great Franz Joseph. And yet, this photo Charles's mother requests of the emperor with her son seems eerily prescient. Several twists of fate will eventually bring the Archduke from the back of the line of succession to the very front. The last of these fateful events occurs on the 28th of June 1914 and is destined to change both Charles's life and the course of history itself.
My God. Were they both killed outright?
It is the spark that ignites the First World War. In Sarajevo, the student Gavrilo Princip has assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Habsburg throne, and his wife.
A Serb. For God's sake.
At this moment, it becomes clear that Charles will eventually become emperor.
Undoubtedly, this development also placed incredible strain on him, as he was never prepared for the role of emperor.
The aging Emperor Franz Joseph no longer has the time or strength to prepare Charles for his future responsibilities. After 68 years in power, he dies, aged 84, in November 1916.
As we left the room in which the emperor died, his former adjutant, Lobkowitz, approached us. With tears in his eyes, he made the sign of the cross on his forehead and said,
"May God protect you, Your Majesty."
Amen.
And that was the first time Charles was addressed as emperor, All the responsibility was placed on his shoulders. I supported him as much as I could, like any Austrian woman would have done for her husband if she believed she could help.
When Charles became emperor, the public was largely enthusiastic about the new imperial couple. Of course, they presented themselves as the perfect young family with lovely children. In the beginning, they were very popular, and people were optimistic about his reign. The emperor himself was very accessible, friendly, and willing to listen. His subjects placed a lot of faith in him, and there was an extremely positive atmosphere.
However, Charles and Zita have assumed control of a crumbling empire. Incorporating a number of different nationalities, Austria-Hungary had become a powder keg. A satirical map from 1911 shows the ethnic prejudices that drove the 11 main nationalities, with their own languages and religions, further and further apart. The outbreak of war had united the different factions under the Habsburg flag once more. But as the situation at the front deteriorates, pressure mounts internally. Austria-Hungary's ally Germany plays an ever greater role in maintaining stability.
Increasingly, Austria was seen as a burden. However, politically and militarily, it remained the only ally that could still be considered at least somewhat compatible. As such, Germany was trapped. The German Empire was forced to assume the weight of the problems that Austria-Hungary faced, but there was simply no alternative.
Now, however, Charles I is prepared to betray his brothers in arms to save his own empire.
Mon cher Sixte.
Following his meeting with the Bourbon princes, Charles drafts a letter nominally addressed to his brother-in-law Sixtus. In fact, the letter is actually directed at President Poincaré of France, and therefore also at France's ally, England.
My dear Sixtus, the end of the third year of the war that has brought so much sadness and suffering to the world draws near.
Charles agonizes over every word. He will compose more than a dozen versions before he is satisfied.
It is, therefore, my great pleasure to acknowledge that, although we are currently adversaries, my empire and France are not divided by insurmountable conflicts of interest.
And? You making progress?
Yes. Could you just...
Zita certainly took the lead and was the driving force. Tomáš Erdody's journals have now provided confirmation that she was present during the writing of the Sixtus letters.
Prince Sixtus carries the emperor's letter to France and personally delivers it to President Poincaré in the Élysée Palace.
I therefore ask you to convey to the President of the French Republic, in secret and unofficially.
2 weeks later, news of the emperor's letter reaches the British Prime Minister, Lloyd George.
That I will use all the means at my disposal with my allies to support France's just demands pertaining to the return of Alsace-Lorraine.
And, finally, England's King George V.
In the hope that we can together end the suffering of so many millions of people. Charles. This means peace, Prince Sixtus.
God willing, Your Majesty.
This, of course, took events to a whole new level. The Austrian emperor was now using his personal relations to open negotiations with the French and English governments. The fact that he neglected to inform the Germans at such an important phase of the war was politically short-sighted.
Emperor Charles hopes to rectify the situation and present his allies with his peace plan just days later, during a meeting with the German Emperor Wilhelm. However, face to face with the German military command, Charles's courage fails him, and he is able to do little more than drop vague hints.
Kaiser Karl hatte seinen Bundesgenossen
Emperor Charles had told his German counterparts that if we did not make peace soon, the people would take matters into their own hands, and that this would be to their detriment.
Charles eventually leaves without admitting to his actions. However, his allies suspect something, and their suspicions are reinforced by reports from the intelligence services.
His troops can be trusted, but can he?
The Germans know that they cannot afford to break with Austria, politically or militarily.
I heard a saying recently. We're obliged to consider everyone we meet a good person. Until they convince us of the opposite.
It was widely known that Austria was interested in peace. However, most assumed that their interest lay in a general end to hostilities, rather than peace at the expense of an ally. That came as a big surprise.
Charles makes a further grave error. He ignores the role played by Italy. Originally allied with Austria at the outset of the war, Rome had switched allegiances in 1915, and now has far more to gain from a victory over Austria than from any compromise. Above all, Italy hopes to claim the pride of the Habsburgs, the port of Trieste. During a meeting in the French Alps, the British and French attempt to persuade the Italians to grasp the opportunity for peace. However, the conference in Saint-Jean-de-Maurienne on the 26th of April 1917 fails. Charles simply cannot afford, politically, to make concessions to a country he considers traitorous.
In his memoirs, Poincaré records that the Italians were absolutely furious.
The dilemma was that the Italians had been offered a lot to convince them to fight on the side of the English and French. There was now no way they were prepared to make compromises or take a smaller share of the treasure they had been promised.
As a result, these very complex and vigorous efforts and the high hopes associated with them came to nothing.
The brief chance of peace vanishes as quickly as it appeared, and the drums of war beat louder than ever. Germany intensifies its U-boat warfare, and any ship is liable to be sunk without warning. As a result, the USA enters the war. Unexpectedly, German and Austrian troops celebrate an overwhelming victory over the Italians at the 12th Battle of the Isonzo. The Central Powers and their adversaries now increase the use of a controversial weapon which adds to the horror of the conflict: poison gas. After 2 revolutions, Russia withdraws from the First World War, and its soldiers lay their weapons down. 500,000 German soldiers can now be transferred to the West for the final push. The Spring Offensive begins in March 1918. It is the largest military campaign the world has ever seen, and the German Empire is now all but certain that victory lies within its grasp. Even the otherwise circumspect Austrian foreign minister, Count Czernin, allows himself to be swept up in the spirit of victory. 1 year after his emperor's peace initiative comes to nothing, he gives a speech at City Hall in Vienna. Contrary to all accepted diplomatic practice, he claims that France's Prime Minister Clemenceau has secretly asked him to open negotiations for peace.
And then it all blows up. Janine makes his speech, and Clemenceau promptly responds that it's all a lie and that he has the letters to prove that the Austrians approached France in secret to negotiate a separate peace. It's an early 20th century version of a fake news war. There's no Twitter, but Janine publicly makes a false claim, and Clemenceau can't possibly let it stand. He has to find some way of bringing facts back into the debate.
Within a few days, the affair becomes an international scandal, with each side accusing the other of spreading lies. Eventually, the French Prime Minister releases incontrovertible proof to the media: the Austrian Emperor's letters of March 1917.
On the 13th of April 1918, Erdődy wrote in his journal, "Today, the letter is in all the newspapers. It has caused great commotion. It is a letter from the Emperor to Prince Sixtus that I remember well."
Unfortunately, Charles's reaction was the wrong one. Instead of standing by his efforts and admitting that they failed, he says, "I have no knowledge of any letters."
It is a personal as well as political disaster for Charles. He has been revealed to be a liar on the international stage, in full view of his German allies.
No man shows me gratitude. My faith was misplaced.
Your Majesty, I told you Austria was not a suitable country for a political alliance.
Do you wish to declare war on Austria-Hungary, Your Majesty?
Be silent, Ludendorff. Make yourself useful and get me the Austrian Emperor.
Naturally, the Germans are appalled by the revelations that there were offers of talks and negotiations with the Allies. From a German point of view, at a time when the country believed it would eventually be victorious, this amounted to total betrayal. The Germans certainly wanted revenge.
Und dafür rächt sie sich auch im wahrsten Sinn des Wortes.
Emperor Charles is unable to deal with the mounting pressure. Janine demands the emperor issue a formal statement that the foreign minister had nothing to do with the letters. An outright lie.
Count Janine, you cannot possibly expect the emperor to sign this.
The emperor has compromised himself. He must choose, abdicate or deny everything.
Sir, you must be insane.
These events are also recorded by Tomasz Erdődy in his journal.
Then you must take responsibility, Tomasz.
I wouldn't dream of it. I'm here to act on the Emperor's orders, not to cover for some minister.
If you refuse, then I am a dead man. Then a bullet is my only option. So
be it.
Charles's reign would appear to have come to a shameful end. Janine even attempts to force the emperor to relinquish power and accept a provisional regent.
That was, however, his final move. I got rid of him. The Empress gave me back my confidence.
Captain Snag. Don't you think that the Emperor and I deserve to know where you were ordered to take us? I had to read in the paper that it is probably Madeira.
Oh, I hope so, for your sake.
You hope so?
The Admiral seems to think that ascension might be possible.
Ascension?
Here. Ascension. A small volcanic island. Population 100, governed by an English officer. Tropical heat, worse than St. Helena.
Napoleon's St. Helena.
Exactly. That's why I say Madeira, before those in London change their minds.
How would Austria-Hungary's German allies react to the emperor's betrayal? On the 12th of May 1918, in the Belgian town of Spa, Charles is summoned to appear before Emperor Wilhelm. the German emperor makes no secret of his disdain.
When Wilhelm receives the Austrian emperor, he makes it very clear that he considers him both weak and a traitor, and that he plans to punish him as you would a naughty schoolboy. As part of Germany's revenge, Charles is forced to sign everything the Germans demand of him. From that point on, Austria is no more than a vassal state of the Reich.
The memorandum of the meeting in Spa is a protocol of the complete and utter subjugation of Emperor Charles, and essentially makes Austria-Hungary a part of the German Empire. As a result, Germany now has total control over the armies of the Central Powers. The war will be decided on the battlefield. Tomasz Erudi, Charles's friend, is at the Emperor's side in Spa. He knows the end is coming.
We can count ourselves lucky if the Germans don't attack us.
Excuse me, Your Majesty. Does Your Majesty know what the Viennese call you?
Well?
Charles the Last.
On the 17th of August 1918, Charles celebrates his last birthday as emperor, surrounded by his inner circle. He is just 31 years old and a resounding failure. At the beginning of his reign, people had considered Charles and the Austro-Hungarian Empire an important check on German power. Now, everything has changed.
Essentially, the Allies had made their decision. As it was impossible to negotiate a separate peace with Austria, they saw no alternative to the complete defeat and capitulation of the two powers.
The short version is that the Sixtus Affair and Charles's actions contributed to the end of the empire. However, the question is whether the monarchy had any chance of survival at all once the war broke out.
Charles hoped to achieve peace, but his once great empire descends into total war. There is nothing left for the pious emperor to do but pray.
Hail Mary, full of grace. The Lord is with thee.
In August of 1918, Austrian and German resistance begins to crumble across Europe. At the end of October, in the course of a few days, the nations of the Austro-Hungarian Empire declare their independence. The Habsburg, Romanov, and Hohenzollern families are forced to accept their subjects' demand for self-determination, bringing their historical reigns to an end, once and for all. The old Europe of the aristocrats has vanished, but what will replace it? The peace treaties of Versailles and Saint-Germain create a new order, and sow the seeds for future conflicts. Just 2 decades later, these seeds will give rise to an even more savage war that will once again set Europe and the world on fire.
Now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Emperor Charles I wanted to end the war and save the Habsburg Empire. Both ventures failed.
He allowed himself to be driven, rather than being a driving force himself. He did not believe he could have a significant impact. This may have been an aspect of his character, his personality. Above all, however, I believe it was a result of the course of the war.
1 week after Austria's surrender on the 3rd of November 1918, the imperial family leaves Vienna's Schönbrunn Palace. The following day, the establishment of the Republic of German Austria is proclaimed.
What happens now?
Now, everything ends, Your Majesty.
Charles is forced to relinquish all his political functions, but he refuses to abdicate. Over the next few years, assisted by his friend Tomáš Erdődy, he will launch 2 attempts to reclaim the crown of Hungary, without success. After almost 650 years, the era of the Habsburgs is over.
Perhaps Charles was actually the right person at the right time, in that he so clearly demonstrated the problems associated with monarchies, that certain people inherited so much power that they were not qualified to deal with, people who simply lacked the ability to lead a country.
Following the failure of the attempted coups by the former imperial couple, the victorious Entente powers decide to solve the problem once and for all. Charles and Zita's journey into exile takes them along the Danube, through the new countries established by their former subjects, and to the Romanian river harbour town of Galați. It is the humiliating end to an empire of many nations, united under the banner of a single dynasty. Empress Zita is never able to accept the new Europe of nation-states. Until her death at 97, she continues to maintain that the Habsburgs have a divine right to power. Exile does nothing to change her views.
Madeira, you say?
Yes. It has been an honor to have you on board my ship, Your Majesties.
Farewell, Captain.
It was a pleasure.
Just 4 months later, Charles dies of pneumonia in Madeira at the age of 34. How will the last Habsburg emperor eventually be remembered by history? For his sincere ambition to secure peace? Or for the somewhat inept betrayal of his ally?